My name is Kevin Kline, and I've been an associate pastor at Encounter Church since June of 2021. But this was not the way I saw my life spanning out. See, I had two jobs that were in the New York State retirement system. I had great benefits, and I felt that I was set for life. But we know God has a sense of humor, and He was working me towards a life that had more than comfort as a goal. Now, my journey started because of my mother. She had bought me a Bible and brought me to church every single week, and I read this Bible over and over and over. And she was not ashamed of me when I grew older and I was no longer reading that Bible, when I would come to church in the same clothes as the day before, when I had stitches in my head, or when I had a black eye, or even when I was hungover. And because she was not ashamed of me, I just kept going with her, and she nursed my spiritual health until later on in my life, until I met another woman. And that woman was Anna, and she became my wife, and she was quick to share with any person that listened that, hey, somebody had prophesied over her that she was going to marry a pastor. And I was quick to point out there's a lot of false prophets out there. And I also told her, remember here, I'm Catholic. Catholics don't become pastors. Later on, we attended a non-denominational church together where we learned that a handful of families had sponsored my wife's family, and all of those families were in this church, and they had sponsored her and her family back in 1990 to leave the USSR and to come to the United States. We found that connection with that church was something God had ordained because we had no idea of that background before we went there. Not long after that, I immediately felt more than a nudge to sign up for a certificate program at Northeastern, and the certificate program was called the CHET program. It was like Christian Hispanic Education and Training or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but nevertheless, my blue eyes signed up for that one, and I took classes with primarily people who were already in pastoral ministry. See, I already knew, but I was not going to commit to the direction that the Lord was pushing me towards because I was afraid. I didn't want to do it either. And now while I was taking these certificate classes, a female pastor, not in the classes, but somebody I had no connection with, somebody I'd never went to church with, I never had a conversation with, called me up and said, hey, I had a dream about you, and you were holding a Bible in front of a church and you were preaching. Now, I just dismissed that and thought, well, she's not, she's crazy, and I went about my life. But God kept calling me. One day while working at the same church that I had mentioned before that had sponsored my wife's family to come from what is now the Ukraine, the pastor pulled me aside in the kitchenette and asked if he could pray with me. Now keep in mind, this is at lunchtime. People are using the toaster, the microwave. They're carrying around their plastic bags that are holding their lunch in it, and it's kind of loud, so it was kind of an awkward prayer, but it was spontaneous. And he prayed for me to recognize and commit to the path the Lord was calling me to. Now, outside of that female pastor I mentioned, outside of this male pastor I mentioned, outside of my mother and my wife, there was also this guy who was teaching those Czech classes named Louis Cologne, and he was pushing me towards signing up for a master's program at Northeastern. I was like, why? You know I'm not going to be a pastor. I don't want to be a pastor. And after all, you want me to sign up for a master's program? I don't even have a bachelor's, brother, and that's how it works. You know, it goes bachelor's, and then it goes to a master's program. But I said, fine, if you're going to keep bothering me, I'll apply. And that's what I did. I applied. And didn't I have a conversation with Rebecca Letterman and Doug Holm, and they decided that they were going to let me in. Now, it's even crazier than that. I was going to have to drive to Rochester from Syracuse every single week, and that meant I was going to have to quit my job with my retirement, my benefits, and my salary. That sounded crazy to me, and there's no way I was going to start this without my wife either, and there's no way she was going to agree with this. So I went home, and I told her, and she was like, hey, you better go start the car and fill it up with gas, huh? No, though, of course, I'm looking for any way to get out of this, and I said, how are we going to pay for gas when I'm quitting my job? Now, like I said, I was trying to get out of this, and doesn't the Reverend Paris Price pop up and say, hey, you want to carpool with me and my friend Olga Gonzalez? See, it's my car, my gas. All you have to do is drive. All these obstacles were falling down like dominoes, and I'm sure, like I mentioned before, the Lord has the Lord was just laughing and laughing the whole time. Now, somewhere in there, I committed to what I already knew God was calling me to do, and somewhere in there I was able to reflect and see that God had been paving this way for me for a really long time. And at some point, I don't know exactly when it was, but I committed to following after the Lord, and I knew I was going to walk into pastoral ministry.